All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 21st webinar in the LEMDO Shirk-funded training series. Today we are going to be talking about putting it all together. So you've been with us through 11 months from talking about how to start your edition and how to plan everything out. And now we're at the point of talking about how to put everything together for peer review. So before we talk about that, we'd like to begin in a good way. We acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen, Songhees, and Esquimalt peoples on whose territory the University of Victoria stands, and the Lekwungen and Wet'suwet'en peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. And I am speaking to you from unceded Wet'suwet'en territory. I will introduce myself first. I'm Janelle Genstad. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a professor of English at the University of Victoria and also the academic director of the Humanities Computing and Media Center. I'm the conceptor and director of LEMDO, and I'm also the co-coordinating editor of Digital Renaissance Editions, the Moemel Mayoral Shows Project, and the new Internet Shakespeare editions. So our plan for today is that you will know when to pull everything together for peer review or final release of your edition. You will learn how we pull editions into anthologies, including how to license your edition for an anthology. And third, you will know what you need to do to finalize your files, including giving credit to the people who have helped with your edition and, of course, yourself. You will learn how to finalize metadata. There will be more discussion of that in 2 weeks when Navarra shows you how to do that, the technical side of that. And we'll talk about checking diagnostics. I will explain what diagnostics are when we get there. Feel free to ask questions or make comments as we go along. I've got the chat open on my other screen, and Navarra will also be monitoring that. And if you prefer to wait till the end, that's totally fine too. So let's talk first about timing. When do you need to pull all the pieces of your edition together? The first time you're probably going to need to do that is when it's ready for some kind of peer review. So in order to make editions available for peer review, we have a special anthology called the Peer Review Anthology. We can put editions in there temporarily so that they can be made available for any kind of assessment purpose. So we've put editions in there for traditional peer review, but we've also put them in there for oral examination for people who have been creating editions for honors projects or master's projects. And if you are going through a tenure and promotion process, we can also put the edition into the peer review anthology so that you can give a link to your RPT committee so that they can see how you're doing. I'm also happy to write a letter if you're going through that kind of process to explain what you've done so far, the amount of work it takes, what kind of skills it requires, and what you have left to do. So this is a screenshot from the peer review anthology, and you can see that we've got 3 things in there right now. Henry V is in there. Andrew Brown's Tess Irene's Trophiae, or the Tramps of Peace, for the Moms Anthology, and also Civitatis Amor, which is still in there after Mihaela defended her honors thesis project earlier, last year, 2004. Okay, now once they've gone through peer review and we don't need them anymore, we remove them from the peer review anthology and they will go over to their home anthology for publication. Because you have given out the link to people, we will put a redirect on that link so that people get to the final version of your site. So just so you understand that mechanism, which I think was quite clever, it was our developer, Martin Holmes, who thought that up. He thought, we have a mechanism for building anthologies. Why don't we make a peer review anthology and we can put things in there so that people can look at them without being able to see all the other work that people are doing and we're publishing or making available through the LEMDO Dev Anthology. So you will proceed to peer review of some sort when your edition is complete, for sure. You could also choose to have your edition go through peer review, partial peer review, when it's reached a key milestone. That's not usually a decision you make on your own. It's a decision that you would make with your anthology lead. You're going up for tenure and or promotion. LEMDO is happy to facilitate that, provided your anthology lead is happy to support that. And your edition is ready for defense if it's part of your degree. So I've added, and your anthology lead is satisfied. So, LEMDO doesn't like to do an end run around anthology leads. Fortunately, we work well with them, and I actually am an anthology lead on 3 of them, so it's not usually a problem. Okay, so let me just remind you what a DRE, NISE, QME edition consists of, and mom's editions are in line with this, except that they don't have the facsimile images and transcriptions. So a full edition will include at least facsimile images, a semi-diplomatic transcription, an amended and modernized text, a collation, a set of annotations, a textual introduction, a general introduction, a bibliography, and an edition page. And I'll put in a plug for the next webinar in 2 weeks. Navarra is going to go through in detail how you put together your edition page and manage the information that's captured in the edition page. You might also have other pieces. You might have a critical survey. You might have a performance overview. So there are other components, but this is what we consider to be the basic edition. There's a couple of points in the edition where it makes sense to stop and have things peer reviewed. But again, you should check in with your anthology lead. So on the left, you have what I would consider to be a kind of really logical stopping point for a LEMDO edition. Editors have decided to stop after they've done these things. And basically everything on the left is the textual stuff, establishing a text and writing textual notes and a textual introduction. So a complete edition that's going to be handed off to somebody else for the critical part would include facsimile images, a transcription, the amended and modernized text, the collation, textual annotations. So that would include textual notes and lineation notes if there are any, textual introduction, and a bibliography. Okay, so we've had several editors stop after this point and then pass the edition over to somebody else to write the general introduction and so on. So if that's how we're proceeding with your edition, we should get your part peer reviewed so that it's a complete self-contained object that you can put on your CV. There's a little mini milestone in there, and this is especially valuable for early career scholars, students who might be doing this for an honors thesis. The mini project that I've done quite successfully a number of times now is to have a student do the transcription, the semi-diplomatic transcription from the facsimile images. And we might want to get that peer reviewed. Sometimes if a student does it, the peer review is actually done by the editor who's going to pick up the edition. But it's nice for the student to have some kind of peer-reviewed publication on their CVs as they're moving forward in their careers. A complete edition includes all of the things that I listed on the previous slide. So the second milestone occurs when all of those things are done. In either case, you'll have an edition page, which needs to be curated. More about that in 2 weeks. So I'm just, I flashed this slide up a month ago. I'm putting it up again just so that you can see what a curated edition page looks like. All right, worth noting at this point is that any kind of peer review is usually a 2-step process. LEMDO will do a code review. Even if an RA on our team did the encoding for you, we'll get somebody else on the team to do a code review, and then there'll be a scholarly textual review. So even before we put something in the peer review anthology, there's a review process that's happening at LEMDO headquarters. So moving on to the next section, I'd like to explain how we add your edition to an anthology. I think it's quite a clever digital process. I'm really proud of this. Martin and I co-created it. And we think of it as a kind of a handshake process of licensing your edition for publication. So from a technical perspective, an edition is a collection of related files. They are usually kept in a single portfolio. I'm giving A Humorous Day's Mirth here as an example. The pathway to that portfolio is a LEMDO /data/text, and then the abbreviation of your edition. And inside that portfolio, we'll have at least 3 folders: an app folder that contains your collation and annotations, a crit folder that contains your bibliography and your textual introduction and any other critical paratext, and a main folder which contains your semi-diplomatic transcription and your amended modernized text. Sitting at the same level, organizational level, in the edition portfolio is an XML file which just hangs out by itself. It's not tucked inside a folder. And that's the edition page that you'll be talking about curating in a couple of weeks. Now, it might appear that putting something in this edition portfolio includes the file in the edition, but that's not actually how it works. This is an organizational technique that we're using just so that we can give you access to your particular portfolio. So this structure has more to do with access than it does with building the edition. So being in a portfolio doesn't actually make a file part of an edition. You could put 100 files in your edition folder. We hope you don't, but you need to stop at some point. But those 100 files wouldn't necessarily be included in your edition. All that having them in that space means is that you have access to them and write privileges on them. So in order to curate your edition, you have to list in your edition page all the files that you want to include in your edition. Everybody here has looked at XML, so I don't feel super guilty about putting a little XML on the slide, but we will go over the technical aspects of this in 2 weeks. So everything that you want to be in your edition has to be included in your edition page and with a related item element. Okay, so we're kind of gathering things together technically in the edition page. The rationale for that is that it allows you to exclude files that aren't ready. Okay, so if you are applying for a job or you're going up for a promotion and you say, you know what, I've actually finished everything that was on the left-hand side of that slide that Janelle showed. I've got all the textual stuff done. Yes, I'm halfway through my annotations and I'm halfway through my general introduction, but I'm not ready to show those, but I do want to show the rest. Well, you can simply not include those files in your edition page. And from the processor's perspective, it's like they're not even part of your edition yet. Okay, so the reason it's called the handshake model of inclusion is that you including files in your edition doesn't necessarily put things in an anthology. Okay, so you, the editor, have to license every single file that you want to include in your edition for the anthology that it's going to go into. Navarra will cover technical aspects of licensing next week. Basically, you have to say, I am willing to have my edition published in this particular anthology. And then the anthology in turn says, I'm willing to include your edition in my anthology. And both sides have to do something in order for the edition to be included in the anthology. So effectively, it's like a contract. You both have to sign it for it to be valid. Okay. Now you don't list your edition in the anthology. It's the anthology lead who does that, or the anthology lead who instructs LEMDO to do that. Okay. Once both parties have done their technical thing, then your edition can be included in an anthology. Okay, so for now, I'm imagining that you're readying your edition for the peer review anthology, but the process is exactly the same when you are ready to have your edition published in the New Internet Shakespeare editions, or the Queen's Men editions anthology, or the Digital Renaissance editions anthology, or the Moms anthology. It's exactly the same process. You license your edition for inclusion, and you license all the files in the edition, and then the anthology agrees to include your edition. Okay, so how it works. I've got a diagram on the next. I do not have a diagram. I meant to do a diagram. We tell Jenkins is our continuous integration server. And a continuous integration server recognizes whenever you've committed something to the LEMDO repository, and Mr. Jenkins, whose icon is a butler, buttles around and says, oh, there's a change here. I must tidy things up and then rebuild this entire project. So we tell Mr. Jenkins, our continuous integration server, to build the anthology. So once the peer review anthology is ready to be built, we say, please go ahead and start building this anthology. Every time Mr. Jenkins builds that anthology, the first thing that he does is check for an instruction to include an edition. Mr. Jenkins then checks that edition page, and it's looking for all of those files that have been included with a related item element, and then builds all of the files listed in the edition page. Okay, and then we can view all of those HTML pages as part of the anthology. Okay, you don't need to understand how it works for it to happen, but I know I appreciate knowing what's happening behind the scenes so that I can understand better what's going on. Okay, so I'm just going to toggle over to this link for a second. Okay, so there is Henry V in the peer review anthology, and you can see from the URL that we are sitting inside the peer review anthology right now. Okay, it doesn't look fancy. It looks exactly like LEMDO Dev because we're not investing time in any kind of design, unique design for the peer review anthology. Okay. So for the final release of your edition, once the peer review process has taken place, which would happen by your anthology lead sending a link to the peer review anthology, and then waiting the usual amount of time for peer review to come back, you'll have a chance to revise. Your anthology lead will give final approval for the edition. LEMDO will do a bunch of things behind the scene. We'll check the code again. We'll check diagnostics, and then eventually we'll release your edition with the next release of your anthology. Okay, and it's the same process of licensing, as I said before. Okay, I'm gonna pause for questions here. Okay, so let's move on to licensing. Again, Navarre is going to cover the technical aspects of this in more detail. We license a file for an anthology using a license element, and I'm just going to flag this final part here. We are licensing this particular file for the peer review anthology. You can license it for multiple anthologies at the same time, which is something we actually hope is going to happen. We hope that there might be a Kingsman anthology at some point in the future, or a Haywood anthology, and those anthologies would be pulling in editions that might also be included in other editions, in which case the edition would have to be licensed for the Haywood anthology and the Digital Renaissance Editions anthology, and anything that Haywood wrote that we've published in the Moemal Mayoral Shows anthology would have to be licensed for the Moms anthology and for a Haywood anthology. Okay. There's 3 conditions that have to pertain for a file to be included in an edition. So each XML file that you want to be peer reviewed. So I'm back to my example of having the file included in the peer review anthology. So every one of those XML files must be included in the edition file. So that's condition 1. Condition 2, each of those files has to be licensed for the anthology. And condition 3, the anthology has to have an import instruction to include the edition. All right, and here is the diagram I alluded to here. So if we imagine that our anthology is over here, our peer review anthology, there's an instruction inside that anthology to import the Henry V edition. And Mr. Jenkins gets busy and says, aha, the anthology has ordered up the Henry V edition. I will go check the Henry V edition page and see what files are listed there in related item elements. And one of those files is it's actually the folio modern text. Is the folio modern text, and Mr. Jenkins sees that listed and goes, I need to go find that particular file, and he does. On the way to the anthology, he says, am I allowed to add this file to this anthology? Is it licensed for this anthology? And is it ready to be included? And sometimes the answer is no. And in that case, our anthology diagnostics will catch the fact that it's not quite ready here. Okay, so I am going to give you a live demo here from the LEMDO Dev Anthology. All right, so if you're working on an edition, you're probably looking at the LEMDO Dev site from time to time. If you go to this is not the right one. Yeah, take 2 here. So if you go to LEMDO Dev, the final tab on the menu is Anthologies. You may have never clicked on this before, but it is a quick way to have a look at all the anthologies that we're building. And you can click on the pre-release status for any anthology and have a look. So we just released a peer review anthology a couple of weeks ago, and we haven't added anything new. And so these diagnostics are all nice and green. We're good to go. There's nothing release blocking on this list. But we're actively working on the DRE release right now. And if we click on DRE pre-release status, you see lots of pink here. And that's because things are not entirely ready. So if you can see this small type here, the license status is okay. Yes, it's licensed for this anthology, but the file is not finished yet. It's still in proofing. Okay, and there's a piece of information in the file that says what its status is. Okay, so LEMDO wouldn't release this anthology until the anthology leads and the editors working together had cleared all of this stuff. Okay, lots of pink down at the bottom. And, I'll confess, these are all files I'm supposed to be working on, so I have some work to do. Okay, so if we go back to our slides. You can see the peer review anthology, which has just been released. Sea of Green, the DRE anthology. The green is interrupted by some pink. That is stuff that we need to take care of. Now, this is a human built infrastructure. So it was LEMDO that decided that we would be checking for these things. We can add stuff. So if there's ever a point when anybody who's running an anthology says, I really would like to be able to check for this thing before I release the anthology, it is possible to add it. Diagnostics are something that happens beyond the usual validation that you do in your XML file. And we can write diagnostics that allow us to check for all kinds of things. Okay, so make sure that this file actually has a named editor. That might be something in case you've forgotten to give credit to yourself. We could be checking for that. Okay, finalizing your files. We are called Linked Early Modern Drama Online. If you are not used to working in a digital environment, this is a good point to stop and think about how you might help your reader by building links between parts of your project. So if you say in an annotation that you've given more information in the critical introduction, why not make a link to the paragraph where you actually talk about the thing that you're directing your reader's attention to? If you are quoting pieces of the text in your introduction, why not point people back to the very passage in your edition that you're talking about? If you want to draw their attention to, and from the critical introduction to something that you've said in your textual introduction, you can build that link as well. Okay, so we have done a webinar on linking. It hasn't been transcribed and published yet, but it will be on our YouTube channel when it's available. So watch for those things. You'll also want to take some time to complete your metadata. A lot of us ignore it until we get to the point where we have to look at it. It's the first thing in the file, but lots of us just scroll down and get right to work on our speeches and our stage directions. A lot of the fields in the TEI header are under LEMDO's control or under your anthology lead's control, but there are a few where you will need to add some things or at least give us the information about what's happened. So sources of funding, we don't always know if you got a grant to work on this edition or if you got some funding for an RA and you want to acknowledge that somebody gave some money to somebody. The origin of the file, we don't always know everything about the source of it. And the editorial procedure, there may be something that's unique to your way of working that you want to indicate in your edition. Okay, so we'll just work through these really quickly, and Navarra will go through them in more detail. So funding, indicate any grants, any course releases, travel awards, and sources of RA funding. Give links if you can. So if the funding agency has a stable webpage, it's nice to give a shout out to the funding agency. So this example captures the information that one of the funders for every page in the LEMDO project is the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and I've made a link to their website. Metadata also captures the origin of the file. So I've just pulled a few examples out of various files. I'm going to start at the bottom. Source desk, modern text prepared by Lucy Monroe from Rachel Fain's manuscript with reference to Marion O'Connor's transcription. Okay, the one above it, modern text established by Mihaela Gallagher. And then a slightly more complicated one here. This is for something that Navarro worked on. Source desk, we give some information about the manuscript, and note that we could have a full MS desk here, which is standard for manuscripts. But if we don't have all the information to make up a full MS desk as required by TEI, this is another way you can do it. Transcription prepared by Navarro Holden for publication in the DRE 2.0 anthology on the LEMDO platform. I'm missing a closing angle bracket there. The LEMDO guidelines don't prescribe what should happen here. There are so many possible things that you would need to say depending on the type of file and the source of the content of that file. So we have some examples that you can follow, but ultimately it's going to be up to you and your anthology lead. Basic rule of thumb, give credit where credit is due and enable people to trace your steps back to the source of anything that might be in your file. And also the editorial procedure that gets captured in an editorial decal element. And at the very least, you want to flag which editorial guidelines you followed, right? Most of us are following the new DRE editorial guidelines. We have some legacy editions that are still using the ISE editorial guidelines from our predecessor project. Okay, so this editorial declaration comes from an edition page. You can use the editorial declaration in a different way. So we don't prescribe a spelling style because we have editors all over the world. So if your about page for your edition or your critical introduction uses Canadian spelling, obviously you're not following a set of editorial guidelines at this point. Editorial guidelines cover the establishment of the text and the collation and the annotations. But you could use this to say this document was prepared following Canadian spelling conventions or Australian or British or American. This is our solution to the fact that standardizing spelling across a project like this would be almost impossible. At least be standard inside your own edition and tell us what you picked. Let's move on to metadata. Credits. Whom to credit for what and where. So we make a distinction between what we do in those edition files and what we do in the edition landing page. So edition files, you're going to give credit to anybody who worked on the file and indicate what specific roles they played. So you might have a transcriber and an editor. In the case of a collation, you might have the compiler who puts together the collations for a bibliography. Someone compiles that bibliography, usually the editor. The annotations have to be authored by somebody, usually the editor. We like to say you're authoring them because that is actually what you're doing. That's the activity. Likewise, critical paratext. You also have to give credit to the copyright holders of the XML and the intellectual content, whoever that is. So we have a few cases where the editor has shuffled off this mortal coil and somebody else is managing the intellectual content for them. UVic always holds the copyright on the XML. And the main reason that we have a copyright statement is that we license almost everything in the LEMDO project under a Creative Commons open license. But you can't license stuff for which you don't hold the copyright. So we have to have somebody holding the copyright who's willing to take responsibility for licensing it in an open way. In the edition files, LEMDO gets a generic credit for markup editing and or remediation. We do it that way because students come and go and we don't want our names to completely overwhelm the editor's names. But on the edition landing page, you want to give credit to everybody who worked on the editions and all its files. So this is where you give credit to the anthology leads and co-coordinating editors. You can also give credit to the peer reviewer if your anthology follows an open review process and the peer reviewer is happy to be acknowledged. And at this point, you can also include the names of all of your RAs who've worked across the edition and LEMDO RAs if we have a particular RA who's done a lot of work on your edition. Some of you work closely with Navara and know how much we rely on what they bring to the project. So you might want to acknowledge their intellectual contribution and support at that point. Right, so let's talk about copy editing and proofing. You may have left XML comments for yourself in the file along the way, and there may also be XML comments in the file from us at LEMDO to you as editor. Okay. So if you want to leave an XML comment to yourself, we've talked about this a couple times before. You start opening an angle, your element, exclamation mark, 2 hyphens, and then your comment. And you can do whatever you want to do inside that comment. The processor ignores it. It's worth remembering that XML comments are public. So if you leave them in the file, people will be able to see them if they click on the inspect view of your HTML. So, be judicious because they're visible on LEMDO Dev. And if you don't remove them, they'll be visible in the anthology that they're published in. Oops, gone too far here. So also, when we're doing our code review, we'll leave little notes for you because we notice content issues when we're doing the code review, and we don't want to let them pass by. The more sets of eyes on your edition, the better your edition will be. All of the RAs at LEMDO are highly skilled readers of texts, even at their early career stage. So I encourage them to flag things that you might want to address. So here's a made-up example of Navarra project manager talking to Genstead editor and saying, should this be a textual note? Because they noted that it didn't really seem to be a performance note, for example. I want to take advantage of that observation on their part.
Janelle, may I jump in for a second?
Yes, please.
You'll notice that at the beginning of that second note, we put the XML IDs in there. So if you know your XML ID, it's really handy. I also, for myself, I always put my XML ID just HOUL3 : before a comment to myself, because if somebody else is coming in and doing code review, it's helpful to know where these comments are coming from, if they're the editor's comments, if they're the remediator's comments, if they're an RA's comments. It's helpful to know. It's also helpful if you're going through and you're trying to get rid of all of your comments to yourself, you can just search your XML ID and then it's easy to find those specific ones. So I will usually put that at the beginning as well, even on comments to myself.
Thank you. You can also find comments. I'll just add a little extra tidbit of information here. If you have never used the outline view in Oxygen before, I highly recommend it. It's my favorite way of navigating through a document. So you go to the window menu, show view, and go down to outline. Yeah, this is quite nice because if you type an element, you will see all of those elements. Notice it's coming up with sponsor, SP, speaker. You can click filter returns exact match, and then you get just your speeches or just your divs. Okay. Now you have to turn off filter returns exact matches for this, but you can type comment in here. And now we see all of the comments that are left in this file. Okay, and James Murdoch has been going through this file and has left some notes for mostly LEMDO, but also a note to self. Okay, so ideally we would want all of these to be cleared before we publish an edition. In some texts, we do leave comments in for the long haul. So if we notice something that looks like a typo, and in fact it's not a typo, we might leave an XML comment to indicate that this is the way it's supposed to be. It's kind of a fancy way of saying sick, but it's visible to the next generation of people working with these files who might question our judgment. Okay. Thank you, Navarra. It would really help LEMDO a lot if you check your citations. There's something about the code review that turns up citation issues, a page range that doesn't make sense, or something that seems off about a journal title, or a vague memory on my part that that's not who wrote that article. So if you check your quotations and citations, that would be really great. It would save us a lot of time. One thing that especially needs a little attention from editors is citations from the Oxford English Dictionary. If you're using the online Oxford English Dictionary, you'll be working with a digital resource that is in flux between second edition definitions and third edition definitions. And the way that definitions are represented has changed between the first, second, and third edition. So between the first and the second edition, the OAD stopped using the abbreviation subst for substantive and moved to an for noun. And they've added new definitions, so the numbering changes as well. So it takes us a lot of time to go chasing down definitions in the Oxford English Dictionary and figuring out if they're second or third edition. So if you can provide us some information, that would be great. And Navarra has put a link to the site OED documentation into the chat. Proofreading is something we all need to do, but because this is digital and you're working with XML files and HTML outputs, there's some particular ways that you might want to proceed with your proofreading. There is a spell checker built into Oxygen. I'm going to pull that file back here. It's under the edit menu. You can check spelling. But obviously, we need to be really careful with that because the spell checker that's built into Oxygen doesn't know that we're working with early modern English. It doesn't know the particular names, but you can ask it to learn things. So you'll be doing a lot of asking it to learn things, but I often catch a typo in my files using this. So I do run it even though I don't accept 95% of its suggestions. You'll also want to proofread the HTML output. So once you've entered corrections, give things a few hours for your edition to build either on LEMDO Dev or in the anthology that it's destined to be released in. Proofread the HTML. And one thing that you'll especially need to do when you're proofreading the HTML is click on the links. Make sure that they're going where they're supposed to be going. We do have link checkers in our diagnostics, so we would catch links that don't go anywhere. But our link checkers can't determine if the link is going to the right place. So click on your collation and annotation links, click on it, links to external resources, and click on any local links inside your edition and make sure that you are taking your readers where you want them to go. Okay. Navarra notes on the spelling, be particularly careful with text and quote elements. Right, so if text is quoted, you wouldn't want to, say you're using Canadian spelling and you're quoting from an American source, you don't standardize to Canadian spelling, and a quotation from an American source, you reproduce it faithfully. Okay, so be extra cautious with spell check. You also want to clear the diagnostics for your edition files. So there are file level diagnostics, and a lot of people don't know about these. I'm going to take the opportunity to demonstrate this because I'm hoping that more people will use this. So we're looking at a humorous day's mirth here. For those of you who are well into the process of editing, you know that when you're working on your collation and your annotations, you are adding anchors to the text that you're collating or annotating. And then in your collation and annotation files, you're pointing to those anchors. If you haven't got there yet, we do have webinars on those and you can go back and watch them. So for now, I'm going to assume that you know what it means to put anchors into a file and what it means to point to those anchors from other files. Something that happens not infrequently is that people add anchors and then they don't use them. Right? You might get really exuberant and wrap anchors around 10 things that you know, today on Thursday, you think you're going to annotate. And by the time your next work session rolls around, you've forgotten all about those, or you've forgotten what you wanted to say, and you end up with these anchors that don't get used. Conversely, it is easy to make errors when you are pointing to anchors. You know, you're working with lots of long numbers. We're not number people. We have to flip from one file to another. It's really easy to type 1516 when you meant to type 1561. So we have built some diagnostics that will check the anchors and pointers. If you are working in your annotation collation files, you can run it. I like to run it from the modern text because it checks the modern text and the annotations and collations. All you have to do is click on the red triangle here. And you can see at the bottom, LEMDO text level diagnostics, transformation in progress. And it's running. I've already run it today, so I'm just going to pull it up. So once that process has finished, it will actually open an HTML file for you in whatever your preferred browser is on your computer. And for the most part, we want to see a 0 here. Pointers not pointing at anything, 0. Phew, all our pointers from our collation and annotation files and from general introduction, etc., are pointing at something. Good. We don't have any annotations or collation entries whose pointers are in the wrong order. We don't have any facsimiles in the semi-diplomatic transcription that don't follow a consistent expected pattern, but we do have 185 unused anchors in this text. So before we finalize this edition, I'm going to go and have a look at those anchors and see what's gone on there. While we're here, we take the opportunity to look at some facets of this file. So there's some statistics there. There are 15 scenes. There are 911 speeches. There are 225 stage directions. Now this is the modern text, so some of them will have been added by the editor. We have 22 speaking characters. The text is about 17,820 words. You've added 6,350 word elements to this text, this modern text. So we can add to this. So if you or your anthology leads think that there are things that would be useful to count, and it's easy for us to count them, and it usually is, we can add that. So you'll get some statistics. There's also statistics by character. So we can see at a glance that Lamont gets the most number of speeches, and these tables are sortable. You just click on the arrow. You can see Laval only gets 3 speeches. And you can sort by average speech length, average word length. That's one I kind of like. So, you know, who uses the biggest words? I think that's quite interesting. Who uses the most words, distinct words? Who has the biggest vocabulary? It's this chap, Lamont, by a long shot. You can also look at entrances and exits. Again, these are things added by the modern editor. So you might want to be careful with analysis, quoting the statistic in any analytical work. And then I think we'll ignore that. That's usually something we check. Okay, so that's the textual diagnostics. We also have edition level diagnostics. So this is the LEMDO site-wide diagnostics. We don't have a good way of accessing edition diagnostics, but this tells us what we need to fix in LEMDO dev. Green is good. Red means we need to fix some things. Yesterday, we actually got down to 0 bad internal links, but we've got 2 new ones. So we pay attention to these, but you can come here and you can search for your edition by its edition name. Okay, so I'm typing in AHDM for Humorous Days Mirth, and there are 7 things coming up here. So if I use my arrow to just work my way through all of these instances of AHDM, I can see that there's a reference to a TLN in the textual introduction. LEMDO doesn't use TLNs, so that's a holdover from the file that we started remediating. This file has an annotation, has a pointer to a person element role, which has no useful content worth linking to. This is LEMDO's way of saying, are you sure you want to link to this thing? Because your poor reader is going to click on this and there's nothing there for them to be illuminated by. So maybe have a think. We decided to change our internal word usage from old spelling to semi-diplomatic. So we have a diagnostic that checks for the phrase old spelling. Once we're satisfied that we don't have any instances of old spelling that we want to change to semi-diplomatic, we'll retire this diagnostic because there are plenty of cases where you're citing titles that have old spelling in them. But we don't want to be flagging those. Okay, Christine, what's your portfolio abbreviation? Are you doing 3 ladies or 3 lords and ladies?
It's 3 lords and ladies.
So you only have 1.
Oh.
That's great. And you don't have to worry about it because the QME anthology decided to go with the wording old spelling. So, you know, you're great. You're correcting things as you go, which is awesome.
How do I get to this? The LEMDO level.
Good question. I will show you. So if you go to the LEMDO dev site, where we all get to flail about and figure out what we're doing, and you go to the resources tab, there are all kinds of useful things here. But if you click on diagnostics here, you'll go directly to this page. Okay. All right. Just watching the clock here. Okay, we're exactly where we need to be. We're at the recap. So I hope that you have learned when to pull everything together for peer review or final release, how editions are pulled into anthologies, including how to license your edition for an anthology. We haven't covered the technical side of that, but you know that it has to be done. And I think that is the most important lesson for today. You also know what you need to do to finalize your files, including making sure you give credit. LEMDO is especially keen to give credit to early career scholars. We don't know your RA's names. That's not something we can add for you. So we really rely on you to keep track of your RAs over time and make sure that they get credit for their contributions to your edition. Finalizing your metadata and checking diagnostics. You can see that I repurposed this slide from the objectives for the day because it still has the ask questions or make comments as we go. We don't have a single chapter yet on what you need to do to finish up your edition. It occurred to me last night that it might actually be a good idea to have more documentation on that at some point, but it's not our top priority right now. Once you have learned more about how we curate that edition page in 2 weeks, you'll want to have a look at the metadata chapter. I do not like leaving metadata entirely to the end. Editions can take years, and there's information that needs to be captured in the metadata before I forget. So I tend to tinker with my metadata along the way. Metadata is something that the LEMDO team checks before your edition is released. So we will make sure that it's consistent, but we do need information from you. And there's some documentation about how to check the status of an anthology. And I've just showed you how to check the diagnostics for the whole LEMDO project, which you can then search for your portfolio ID. Let me put in yet one more plug for the webinar in 2 weeks. It's called Putting It All Together Technical, and it will be 2 weeks from today, same place, same time. And in this technical webinar, LEMDO project manager Navarra Holden will explain how to encode an edition landing page. And they will get into the weeds of metadata at the same time. Let me give some thanks to the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council for funding this webinar series, to Navarra Holden for the slide design, which makes it really easy for me to put together presentations. Thank you, Navarra. To Martin and myself wearing my LEMDO hat for the TEI customization, and to HCMC for site design and hosting. So we have a few minutes for questions. While you're thinking, I have a note in the chat from Navarra giving you the link to our video on linking on YouTube. It's in the collation technical webinar, and it talks about pointing to anchors along with general linking. So I will stop screen sharing so I can see all of you and open up the floor for any questions you might have in our 2 minutes remaining. I don't have to leave immediately, so we can let the questions go. But if you need to go, please just, do what you need to do. Jesus, you have a question.
Yes, and thank you, Janelle, for this webinar. I have a question regarding the moment you clicked on the red triangle for the transformation scenario.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that you first have to select an association scenario to produce those diagnostics.
Yeah,
if I do,
yes, you know your
if I do that with my
SSLT.
files, first I need to.
We've set things up so that the default transformation is the diagnostics. And so you do just have to push the red triangle, but as you know, there are other things that you can do with these files. Okay.
No, but
so there's
I
a whole.
just realized, that I have to set my oxygen with the LEMDO all XPR with the LEMDO. Yeah. All right. Okay.
Right. And we can't say this too often. Always open the LEMDO XPR file before you do anything else, because these tools are available to you when you work in your file after opening the LEMDO XPR file. XPR is a project file. Okay, so Jesus, you can see when I click on the little wrench, which is where we list all of the XSLT transformations that are available, the LEMDO text level diagnostics is already checked.
I see.
If you uncheck that and run any of the other transformations, it may be the case that you have to check that again before you click the.
Please don't run your transformations by clicking on the wrench. When you do that, it will associate it with your file permanently, which
Okay.
you don't want. Generally speaking, you won't need to click on the wrench unless you're writing XSLT, which
Okay.
editors won't be doing.
All right. We should probably plan something in the summer to talk about how to run transformations, because we have some really good ones, including the newest one written by Navarra allows you to number the speeches in your modern text, and which is, great. Because who wants to sit and number 975 speeches? Navarra's XSLT gives them all an XML ID that inherits the value of the scene that it's in. And Diane's added a note that it also throws you off if you're using Oxygen for reasons other than LEMDO. Were you referring to the importance of opening the project file?
It actually continues to draw upon LEMDO's transformations even after you close the so you have to kind of reboot and reconfigure Oxygen every time you stop in LEMDO.
Yeah. So I actually didn't know this until about 2 years ago when I wrote to Oxygen feeling super frustrated. Oxygen is designed for you to always be working in a project, even if it's a sample project, right? I'm sure you know this, Diane, but for the benefit of the tape, you can switch between projects pretty easily. So I'm now in a different project. Okay, this becomes an issue for those of our editors who are editing something for the Oxford Marlowe, which I think you might be, Jesus, as well as for LEMDO. You have to learn how to navigate between projects. For those people who are in that situation, I'm happy to give you a quick primer, or Navarra could do that. Okay, Jesus, did I give you an adequate answer to your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah. Anything else? Well, let me thank you for coming.